got the great pleasure of having Professor Visalepti talking about deep learning for 3D localization. He's a full professor at the library. Yep. University of Bordeaux, associate member of the Manal team.
Sure.
There are some few more chairs over there. He also supervises a research group in computer vision for augmented reality at the Institute for Computer Graphics and Vision at EU Grants. He received a PhD in computer vision in 2001 from the University of Nancy in France after working in the ISA Media team. Then joined the Virtual Reality Lab at EPFL as a postdoctoral fellow and became a founding member of the Computer Vision Laboratory. He became professor at TU Graz in February 2014 and at the University of Bordeaux in January 2017. His research is at the interface between machine learning and 3D computer vision with application to 3D pose estimation, feature point extraction and description, and 3D registration from images. In particular, he introduced with his colleagues methods such as Ferns, Brief, line mode, and dprior for feature point matching and 3D object recognition. He often serves as a program committee member and area chair of major vision conferences like CVPR, ICV, CCV, ACCV, and DMVC. He's an editor for the International Journal of Computer Vision and the Computer Vision and Image Consent Journal. So, yeah, let's thank him.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. And so thank you for being here. Okay, so maybe I can start. So yeah, so I just moved to Bordeaux, so in France, or in French. So I was in Austria before, and I'm still part-time in Austria. And actually, all my research time these days is still with people in Graz. And so, and everything I'm going to present was done by my students and my postdocs in Graz. My talk today will be in two parts. The first part is on 3D object and pose estimation from color images. The second part is going to be on 3D camera pose estimation in outdoor environment, in an urban environment. So it's a little bit different, but the common parts between the two, the two topics are that we estimate 3D stuff from color images, and so it's both are combining deep learning, so that computer vision is still mostly about deep learning, and old-fashioned computer vision, which is using 3D geometry methods. We are trying to combine deep learning to extract things or features from images, and with the 3D geometry algorithms that are still valid and still. So we'll start with 3D object pose estimation, and I can show you what we want to do. So the input is going to be a color image. We already know the object that we want to detect, so we actually have some training images and some 3D model of the object that we want to detect. If you work in computer vision and in 3D pose estimation, so this maybe you recognize the dataset. So it's one of the few datasets for evaluation of 3D algorithms and 3D pose estimation algorithms. So it's a bit artificial, but it's actually pretty challenging. So we want to detect so there are 12 objects in the database. Of course, the markers we are not supposed to use the markers. They are just there to get the ground truth. And we show what we get. So the 3D pose of the objects. So basically a 3D rotation and 3D translation with the bounding box of the object. So there is one bounding box which is blue, the other one is green, and so there is one that corresponds to the ground truth, and the other one corresponds to what we estimate. And as you can see, they are pretty close to each other.
There's one chair here.
And so I will explain how we get it. So just take a few minutes. So what we want to do is to estimate the 3D pose of the object given an image. And so let's say that we already know more or less where the object is in the image, so in 2D. And so we already have a bounding box, but in 2D, and we'd like to get to the 3D pose. So the first thing that we tried is just to simply apply a deep network, so CNN, on the image centered on the object, and predict the translation, so the 3D translation of the object, and the rotation in some form, so that it can be the rotation metrics or the quaternion or the exponential. And just doing that, so really the straightforward deep learning method applied to the problem, we already get pretty good results. So almost on par with the state of the art at the time, which is a bit frustrating. So there is, as a researcher, there is almost nothing else left to do. So fortunately, we can still improve things a little. So the first thing we tried is, so as I said, so I'm old already, so I'm still know what computer vision was before deep learning, and so we tried to combine basically what we can do with what deep learning is good for, and also what we can still do with methods that are not from deep learning. So what we tried is to predict not directly the 3D rotation, 3D translation, but so the 2D projections of some virtual points. And the virtual points that we use, so there are 3D points, and we use points that correspond to the corners of the 3D bounding box of the object. And I will explain why we take this point. But the intuition is that it's simpler for the CNN to predict these 2D points, so that's the points that you can see in this image, so that these eight corners. So we predict their position in 2D, so in the image, and they correspond to 3D points in the object coordinate system. So the intuition is that it's simpler for the CNN to predict these 2D points from a 2D image rather than predicting a 3D pose, so something, so a 3D rotation, a 3D translation from the image. So this prediction is going to be more accurate than the previous one. But we can still, and that's the point of doing that, is we can still compute the 3D pose from these 2D projections. And so that's actually relative. So that's easy. So that's an old problem in computer vision, which is solved now. So if you work in computer vision, maybe you know that it's called the PNP algorithm, but it doesn't really matter. Maybe you can understand that if we know the locations in 3D of some points, and we know where they project in the image, then from this correspondence between 3D points and 2D points, we can estimate where the camera is with respect to these 3D points. Okay, so that's a 3D, 2D correspondence problem. So again, we know the positions in 3D of these points in the object coordinate system. We know where they project in the image, and we can compute from that. We just have to run to call a function in OpenCV to get the rotation and translation.
Do you have ambiguities in there, the box inside out?
Yes, so not for this object, but I will talk about that. Yeah, that's,
Let's have a question.
Oh,
no, that's, but I will talk about that anyway. And so just to explain a little bit more, so to give more details, but that's a standard trick. So we have some real images that we can use for training. For these real images, we know the pose, the 3D pose of the object. We also know the 3D model of the object. So we can extract the silhouette of the object. So that's what you see here in this first image. So that's a real image, but where we remove the background. We can apply some random scaling, so to scale the object, change the background, also change the translation a little bit of the object to generate more training images. So in total, we generate something like 200,000 images from 200 training images, if I remember correctly. And so the scaling, so I think random scaling is going to be useful to be robust to basically scale or translation in depth for the camera. Changing the background is going to be useful to train the network to be robust to background changes, so or to the clutter that is in the background. And the random translation, so it's only a translation in 2D, that's going to be useful to be robust to the localization error by the object detector in 2D. So that's a standard trick to be robust to this kind of thing. So that's other image examples of different objects. So that's so this is a driller, that's a cat toy. So that's a very academic data set, maybe artificial, but it's good enough for the evaluation. So that's the first evaluation that we to show that it's useful to predict the 2D points and then estimate the 3D pose using this PNP algorithm, rather than predicting directly the pose in terms of 3D translation, 3D rotation. So, because it's easier for the network to predict the 2D projections, we get a nice improvement, so 20% improvement, which is always good. And then, so it's difficult to improve the accuracy even by adding more layers. So we can use ResNet layers and so on. But at some point we plateau. So it's difficult to improve the performance or the quality of the accuracy of the pose just by using a deeper network. So then we tried something else, so to refine the first estimate of the pose that we get, and that's actually a very easy or very simple approach, which was again maybe inspired by old work in 3D tracking. So again, pre-deep learning methods in computer vision. So the idea is we already have a first estimate of the pose of the object. We also have a 3D model of the object. So we are going to train a second CNN that takes as input, so the input image, so that's the same image as before, so without the blue box, of course. So that's the blue box is just to show the first estimate, the current estimate of the pose. So if maybe you realize that the blue box is more or less good, so it's already correspond to the pose of the camera, so the object in the middle is the camera, but it's slightly off. So we'd like this box to move a little bit on a little bit like that on the left. So we given this pose, so with the one which is represented with the blue box, we render the 3D model of the object, so using a standard OpenGL rendering. So maybe you can read. So that's the image that you see here. Maybe you realize that the rendering is it's good, but not great. So we don't have the specularities that you can see, for example, here on the object. So it's a good rendering, but not really realistic. And then we train a CNN to predict an update for the 3D pose to improve this 3D pose. And so that means that in our case, so since we represent the 3D pose with the projections of the 2D points, we predict a 2D motion. So for each point, so how we should move these 2D points to improve the pose. Okay, that's right. And so that means that this CNN learns to compare these two images, so the real image and the synthetic image, rendered with OpenGL to predict these 2D displacements, so an update for the pods. And we can keep iterating this CNN. So in practice, after a few iterations, so 3-4 iterations, we get the final. So we cannot improve the estimate anymore, and we can stop. So that's a very simple method, but that's quite general actually. So we applied it to this problem, but to other problems where we need to estimate a pose or something with a feed forward. And so with this refinement loop or this refinement with this second CNN, we can keep improving the accuracy of the pose, so with 6%. But you know, that's the last percents that are the most difficult part. And just to compare with the state of the art, so which is actually pretty recent. So that was last CVPR last year. So actually, we get a pretty good improvement on this dataset. So there are different metrics. So that's why there are these three pairs of bars. But whatever the metric we use, we are still. And so then, what we would like to do in practice is also to be robust to occlusions. So, for example, here, so that's I'm not sure what this object is. So that's a big blue object, but whatever. So we would like to train the network to be robust to these to occlusions, so to partial occlusions, so we can generate training images. So that's why you see the camera here, the cat toy, which are rendered on top of the object to try to make the network robust to these partial occlusions. So we get something which is not too bad without doing anything special so far. So just by training the network with images where the object is partially occluded. So there is a duck in the dataset. There is this driller. There is this cat, which is actually quite occluded, and the network is so that it's not as good as before. So when there was no occlusion, but that doesn't fail completely. So that's encouraging. So we are still working on the problem. So that the partial occlusion are still difficult to manage with neural networks, but we are working. And then, so I'm reaching this problem with the symmetric objects. So that's really the problem in practice. So all these objects. So that's this TV. Oh, sorry, that's Apple. But so the daily life objects. So they tend to be symmetrical, and I'm going to make the algorithm. That is the one that I presented so far fail completely. So it's really a problem in practice because most of the daily objects, they are actually symmetric. So there is actually a new dataset or very recent dataset which is very challenging, which is made of this kind of objects. So I'm not completely sure what they are. It's electrical stuff of connectors. So representative of an industrial problem. So these objects, they are almost all white, so which already make the problem difficult. Plus, they are symmetrical. So that's, for example, so the one on the top, it's not exactly symmetric, but so if you rotate it by 180 degrees, so there is a screw and something in the middle that makes the object not completely symmetric, but that's going to still be challenging. So that's this one is completely it has a symmetry of rotational symmetry, where it's basically a generalized cylinder, and this one has a symmetry of 60 degrees because of this small details. But so, for example, if we apply the algorithm I just presented on this object, basically we completely fails if we are not careful. So that's so the ground truth is the green box, of course, and what we get is something completely screwed. So this blue box, which is completely wrong. So that was a bit disappointing. So maybe you understand the problem. So that's actually a relatively standard problem where we do have a multimodal distribution for the output. So these two images, for example, so they correspond to two very different poses. So one like that, the other one like that. Again, the object is not completely symmetrical, but still the two images look almost the same. So it's very small details that make the object or the object not completely symmetrical. So that means that we can have, so during training, we can have two images, so two different inputs that are very close to each other, but the output that we expect are very far away from each other. So that's a multimodal problem. So that the mapping is not clearly one-to-one, but more one-to-many. So there are probably different ways to deal with this sort of problem. So for example, we can turn to classification problems. So that's what some people do by sampling the pose. And so, but then you need to actually discretize the pose, which is not necessarily very nice. So we wanted to keep our regression, so our continuous approach. So we try to have another solution, or maybe more adapted to the problem. So the first thing so what we did is to during training restrict the range of poses that we consider. So for example, in that case, so since we have a 180-degree symmetry, we are going to train the network with images that are constrained to be between 0 and 90 degrees. And in that case, so there is no ambiguity anymore, at least, so we solved the problem of the ambiguity. Then we can train the network as before, so to predict the 2D projections of the bounding box. That's going to converge nicely. But then we still want to be able to estimate the pose of the object when it's outside the range that we consider for training. So when it's the range that we use for training, so for example between this position and this position, like this image. So this image is not a problem. We train the network for this kind of poses, but we still want to estimate the pose of the object in that case. So in addition to the previous method, we also train a network to tell us in which range the object is. So if it's in the first range that we use for training, then there is nothing we have to do. If it's in the second range, the classifier is going to tell us that it's in the second range, and then we just have to flip the image. And then if we flip the image, and that actually so that's in 2D, but that also works in 3D, then we are back to the first range of poses. And then we can apply the previous method to predict the bounding box, so that we get this. So actually the 2D locations of the bounding box, and we just have to flip the 2D projections of the bounding box, and then we get the bounding box for the initial image, and we can compute the pose from that. So to summarize, we detect in which range we are, if we are in the range that we didn't use for training, we flip the image, we get an image which is in the correct range, we get the bounding box, we flip the bounding box, and we get the box. So the good thing with that is that we keep the regression approach, which is continuous, that's more accurate than a classification approach where we need to discretize the problem. And plus, so we can also keep all the training images because we can flip, we can mirror the images to train the network for this small, for the first batch. And then, so I can show you the results on this data set, the TLS data set with this weird electric objects. So the data set is very challenging. So you have all the problems at the same time. So the objects are almost all white. They have this symmetry. There is also an occlusion, or several occlusions actually. So that's probably the limit that we can get so far. Yeah, so the box has a 90-degree symmetry. So that's basically, if you rotate it by 90 degrees, you get the same object. So the same for the other. Yeah, so that's just thinking about the time that remains. So maybe I will present this part, but I will skip some non-interesting stuff. What we need to train, so the algorithms I just presented are images that are of the objects that are registered. So that means that in practice we need to take the object, take pictures of the object, and compute the pose for these images. So and that means that it takes a lot of time already to move the object or to take images of the object under different processes. And in practice, we also want to be robust to the pose changes, so that we can get by taking pictures of the object from different viewpoints. But we would like to be robust also to illumination changes, so that which is a big problem in practice. So one solution is to, when we take the pictures, also change the illumination during the capture session. So when we capture images, we can also change the lighting. But that makes the problem even more. The problem of capturing training images even more difficult. So what we try to do is to have a way to normalize the images to make them more invariant to illumination. So that's so for example, so on the left, that's a training sequence. So that's images that we captured for training. We are going to use them for creating more training images. So you can see the markers so that we use to register these images. And on the right, so that's the test sequences that we use to evaluate the algorithm. And after the green box is the ground truth. The red box is the one which is completely wrong, is the bounding box that we get by applying directly the algorithm I presented before on the image. So you can see that even if the lighting is not really, it's almost the same, at least to me, just because there is a small difference. The algorithm is almost completely wrong. And so the blue box, so which is not perfect because it should correspond to the green box. So that's the one after the normalization of the image. Oops, sorry. And so we wanted to normalize, to find a way to normalize the image to these illumination problems. So we evaluated a lot of methods actually. So old methods and new methods. And actually, what we got is so that's the defense of Gaussians, which is probably the oldest method in computer vision to get to normalize images. So that was still the one that was performing best. And so if you maybe you remember, so that a difference of Gaussian is looks like that. So we just apply two Gaussian kernels to the image, so that my G kernels here, G filters, and compute the difference between the two images, and there are some coefficients. So that's a very simple method. So again, that's probably the oldest one in computer vision. But what we realized is that it works well only when the coefficients of the method, so the K1, K2 in the formula, and the size of the kernels, so sigma 1 and sigma 2, should be tuned carefully to the image to make the difference of Gaussian work well. So then what we wanted to do is to predict these parameters for the difference of Gaussian given the image, so that we can adapt to the input image. So we get to a model that looks like that. So there are probably different ways to do this. So what we did is to take a linear combination of Gaussian kernels. So here these sigmas are fixed, and what we wanted to predict or to learn are the coefficients of the Gaussian kernel. So basically these weights, so K1 and K2 in the original formula. Now we would like to predict them with a deep network. Okay. So I is the image and F is a deep network, and for each of these weights we would like to predict them, so that the image is normalized, and so that everything else we do to the image is more robust to elimination. So that means, so basically we want to get this network. It predicts the weights for the filter. We get a filter that looks like that, which is actually not true in practice, but anyway. And then we get that we can convolve the input image with the predicted filter, and we get a normalized image. The problem is we don't know, when we train this network, we don't know the values that we want for this weight. So given an image, we don't really know the weights that we want to predict and to make the network predict. There is no good way to identify these good values for this weight. So that means that we cannot directly use a standard supervised method to predict this weight. So the solution that we used is to train these networks, so the one that predict the weight, together with another network which is more standard, which is trying to recognize objects in different images where we change the lighting. And so we are going to jointly train these two networks, and if they work well together, that means that on images with different lighting, that means that this one probably find good weights to normalize the image. And then we can throw the detector away and keep the normalizer. So just to give you an idea, so we trained these two networks together on images that look like that. So we know where the objects are, we know which categories they are, and they are taken into different lightings. And so we can also, like the previous part, so the first part, we can generate more training data by extracting the object and changing the background and also the scale. But so that means that if the two networks can detect objects or recognize the objects in these images, that means that we can normalize the images to that. And okay, of course, we get a curve which is above the other curves, but we need to do this sort of evaluation. We can also extend the method to work on color images, so that's relatively simple to do. I can skip that, and I can show you directly some more results. So this sequence is easy. There is no illumination changes. So that's the same illumination between training images and test images. So that part is okay. So this one, maybe you didn't even realize that, and I didn't realize that it's a different illumination, but the network already. So with you can see the red box is already off and doesn't work that way. And this sequence is with a strong change of illumination. So the blue box is not always perfect, but without illumination at all, so it's even worse. And the problem we still have are with the cast shadows, because they are very difficult to remove especially with a simple method. Okay, so that's maybe we'll move to the second part, and then you can ask questions at the end. 10 minutes? Yeah, no, that should be. So for this second part, what we want to do is basically something like that. So to take a picture or to point the mobile device to a urban environment and get a 3D pose, the 3D pose of the mobile device. So that's for augmented reality maybe, or for robotic application. So to get something which is as accurate as possible. So of course we can use the GPS and maybe a compass to get also the orientation, so basically what you can get from a mobile phone. We're actually going to use the GPS location and the compass, but just as an initial guess. So to give you an idea of the error that we get from the GPS, so that's a rough projection of the 3D model of this yellow building. So it's not too bad, and actually, so this one is a good case, so that can be much worse. But of course, so that's it's clearly off, and we would like to get to a better localization. So these, for example, this edge should be there. This one should be. So, and we want to do that with computer vision. So in computer vision, actually, there are quite a lot of work on this kind of problems. One possible approach, but we didn't want to do that, is to use images, to rely on images, a database of images that are already registered. So that, for example, we can match these registered images, so for which we know the pose with feature points, and get a 3D pose from that. But so capturing these images, so that's already difficult. Maybe we could use Google Street View to match images like that. But Google Street View does not exist in Austria, actually. A little bit in Germany, but almost nothing in Austria. And plus, it's still difficult to match feature points between these registered images and the input images, because the light changes, so that's maybe the registered images where the database were taken during winter, maybe we're in summer, or maybe it's raining, or whatever. So these correspondences are still difficult to do. So what we tried was to use this kind of information of data. So we call them 2.5D maps. So basically they are made of the outline of the buildings. So there we have one 2D polygon for each building, and we also know the height of the groups, we also know the height of the buildings. So we'd like to use these informations, which is actually relatively easy to get, so that the information is on. So there are websites like OpenStreetMap, and the cities actually they do have this kind of data. The problem is, of course, this information, which is a vectorial map of the buildings, and very simplified. There is almost no details, there is no texture, and in the images, so the images are made of pixels, texture, and so on. So that's difficult to do to match this kind of 2D maps and the images. So the first thing we do is to rectify the images, so that's actually easy to do using the IMU, so the IMU on the device. So basically we get the orientation of the device with respect to the gravity vector, and that's an information which is reliable. So this we get two angles, so basically the orientation like that, orientation like that. It's pretty accurate. So from these two angles we can rectify the images, so that means that a vertical, so a column on the image corresponds to a vertical 3D line. So everything is aligned, so that's going to be much easier to deal with. And what we need to estimate now is the 2D translation, 2D translation on the ground plane and the orientation of the camera with respect to the vertical axis. So we have 3 degrees of freedom to estimate. But so again, we would like to, so given with the GPS and the compass, we know more or less where we are, more or less in which direction we are looking at, so we can focus on one part of the map. But still, we need to match this vectorial map with an image line. So we have two methods, two approaches which can be used actually together. So the idea is to detect what I call high-level features, which are features in the image that also appear in the 2D map that we get. So for example, we can detect the corners of the building, so we are going to get something like that. Detecting the corners of the buildings in the 2D map, so that's trivial. And if we can match the corners in the image with the corners in the 2D map, then we can estimate the translation, rotation of the camera with a simple geometric algorithm. So that actually that can be done by solving a very small linear system. And then, so there is also another thing that we can do. If we can extract the facades of the building, so for example, just a rectangle like that for this, so for this part of the building, we can also extract the facades in the 2D map, and from a single correspondence between a facade in the image, a facade in the 2D map, we can actually compute the camera points. So by facade, I mean that we know the two corners of the facade and also its orientation in 3D. And so that's a small quadratic polynomial, so quadratic system to solve to get to the plots. So of course we use CNNs to extract the image information, so to identify the corners. So with the semantic so it's a semantic segmentation problem. Maybe not standard, but it's still a segmentation problem. So to get to the corners, also the facades of the buildings, and we can use almost the same CNN, but with the white training data to predict the normals of the building. So that's, for example, the blue part in this image corresponds, so that means that the network predicts the normals that are in this direction for the facades, the corresponding facades, and the pink one are in the other direction. So we had to create a specific training data because that's not really a standard problem in semantic segmentation. So that means that actually the training data we have come from Graz, so the algorithm probably works only in Graz currently. What is interesting, which is nice to see, is that the segmentation is robust to some extent to partial occlusion. So, for example, there are cars here because the network was trained with images with cars, and the corresponding or the expected output was an image like that, so without with the correct with the border or the bottom of the building at the right place, the network learns to be environment to the image. So we have a small algorithm, small or high-key algorithms to get to the actual corners and facades for this segmentation. So I will skip that because it's still a bit hacky. But the output of these things, so that the input are the semantic segmentation, the normal prediction, and the facades and the corners. And then we have a final method, final step where we check that the prediction is correct. So just by evaluating the likelihood between the rendering of the model that we can get from the 2D map, given the cost that we estimate and the segmentation. We skip that. So just to give you some results. So that's the input images on the first column. So there can be some occlusions. That's the results of the semantic segmentation, so on top of the input image. So that the green stuff that you see are the edges that are detected in the images. That's the normals that are predicted by the second CNN, and that's the reprojection of a 3D model that we get from the 2D map. And so that's most of the time that works pretty well. So you can see here that we see only one facade, and we can still get something pretty good. So we can decrease the error given by the GPS. So maybe I can just finish on one sequence. Then I'm done. So that's again, that's probably the limit of the algorithm. So maybe you recognize, if you work on computer vision, a video sequence from the Kitty dataset. So that's video sequences taken from a car. We do have a 3D model of the building, the surrounding building, and we can align this model on the video sequences. So you can see that it's certainly not perfect. So, but we have a lot of problems. So that's the model, the 2D maps are not very accurate, and the segmentation does not work very well because it was trained on in Graz, on buildings from Graz, and that's applied on buildings from Germany. So that's still different enough for the segmentation to not work perfectly. But we can still do something. Basically, we can remove the drift from the tracking. And I will stop. So I hope that I was in time. So thanks for listening.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
So in the first slide you showed that you added some random background to the object. For many vision tasks like object, it's very indicative of the object. Did you make any, where did you select this random? Did you make any studies?
Yeah, so actually it's almost a standard protocol because the problem is the background does not change in the dataset. So if we learn the context, then it would be much easier actually. But artificially easier. Yeah, so it's because the dataset was not developed with machine learning in mind. That's relatively old dataset. So if we use the context, it would be, I agree, I totally agree with you, but on this dataset that would be almost routine because the background is the same between the training images and the test images, so the objects have more or less have the same configuration, so that would be very useful. But definitely, so if you would want to detect cars, for example, if you can realize, so if you can find where the streets are and so on, the pedestrians, so that would be useful. I totally agree.
So if I understand correctly, you're approaching a problem that looks a lot like an edge extraction, like a segmentation problem. So that's a little weird, right? Because you're looking for something that doesn't even have a volume.
Yes. So, but so the problem is if we want to detect so typically in segmentation, if you detect facades, you will not get the corner. You will just get one big segment for the two facades. So the way we did it, so we could probably formalize the problem a little bit better. So like edge detection. So there are actually a lot of work on edge detection using deep network, and actually I also worked on this problem. What we did was very simple. So that we just defined a rectangle relatively wide, but I agree that it's not the most elegant way to do it. But that was good enough at the time. So,
Do you think there's any other way to approach this? Like a different representation of the output, maybe?
yes. So, for example, so I was working on neuron detection, and so that's something which is really can be 1 pixel wide in images, and so basically we want to predict a very high score on pixels that lie on the neurons. So in that case, that would be the pixels on the line of the corner, and maybe a little bit so a decreasing score when we go far away from the corner, from the line of the corner, and then we can do a local maximum or non-local maximum separation to get to the edges. So that would be probably more elegant. But yeah, so far that's still a bit high to tell you.
Two more questions.
Thank you, sorry for when you are talking about the health estimation of objects, if I understand correctly, you only consider the objects, the single instance of the objects in the videos, right?
Yeah.
And the objects is a very simple color, and the background is also fixed. I'm wondering why there's always like the QR code, the barcode.
Yeah. So that's the barcodes are there for the ground truth. So to know what is the correct pose and to evaluate the algorithm. Of course, we are not supposed to use the markers. Yeah.
So do you also consider like to estimate the health of objects in the wild image in the wild with the camera not calibrated, or the model of the object is also unknown?
Yeah. Yeah, we know here. We assume that we know the internal parameters of the camera. That helps to some extent, but we can probably train a network to predict the internal parameters. That would be an interesting experiment. No, so we do know the internal parameters, and so we also know the objects. So we are currently working on extending that to categories of objects rather than instances. So to detect, for example, to estimate the pose of cars, of motorbikes, and not necessarily the specific motorbike that we know. It's again with deep learning, it's almost easy once you have the right training data. So currently we predict the pose of the objects, but also the sizes of the objects. So that's the length, the width, the height of the objects.
I mean, you also estimate the size of objects?
Yes. So that's not in what I presented, but that's where.
Yeah, I mean.
Let's move to the last question, and perhaps we can also talk afterwards. Sorry. Yes.
So question about the pose estimation for symmetrical objects. So you showed one example where this object had like a 180-degree rotation symmetry, and then you can really understand the situation. You can say, well, we just estimate this 90-degree, or we estimate the angle in this 90-degree, and then we extrapolate. And of course, there are many kinds of symmetries. For every subgroup of the rotation group, you have an object that has that kind of symmetry, and there are many of those. So how do you how would you scale it up, and have you also considered representations of the bounding box that don't have this many-to-one problem?
So yeah, so it's true that we are probably biased a little bit to the training, to the dataset, to the benchmark. So they do have only one axis of symmetry. If you have the cube, then so that's I guess we can generalize it. But anyway, we didn't have the data to test that. But I guess it could be generalized. So that's so I guess that you can.
It gets really complicated though. Think about a dodecahedron. or
To
something.
imagine. Yes, I see. Yeah. I agree. But it's probably in practice that's probably wrong. So you probably don't have to estimate the pose of a dodecahedron.
But you could also have things like approximately symmetric things.
Yes,
like if you have a
that's-
sort of a cylinder that's not quite a cylinder but slightly slanted or something like that.
So I agree that theoretically we do have this problem. In practice, that's probably not. And probably a human would get confused at some point, I guess.
Well, but there are certain representations where these almost symmetric object and the actually symmetric objects are very, very close.
I understand. Yeah, so that's even if it's not perfectly symmetrical, that would be confusing enough for the network. So, but I guess it has a limit. So even if there is a theoretical limit, in practice we probably don't have this to deal with this. It would be a very artificial object, I think. So that's my intuition, because it's difficult to imagine an object which has a lot of symmetry or almost symmetry. That would do the.
Well, something like a vase, maybe.
Yeah, that's.
I think we have to leave the room actually, because it's a student room. So let's just thank the speaker again.